Hey, welcome to my channel. So the title of this video is The Destruction of Tyre, a Biblical Prophecy. So this video is going to be about prophecy in the Old Testament, specifically one prophecy. Prophecy is a word that in modern times has become muddied or generic, right? We understand that most prophecy we come to accept in culture is quite vague. As a matter of fact, most of the prophecies of Nostradamus, a man who is renowned for his prophetic sight, are vague and unspecific. They tend to be predictions about general events such as natural disasters or wars, right? Events that occur regularly as time goes on. And he is credited with predicting the death of Henry II, the French Revolution, the rise of Napoleon, the rise of Adolf Hitler, and even the 9/11 attacks. But he has never offered any specific detail that would credit him with prophetic insight. So we're going to see, or more importantly, I'm going to read to you what God says about prophecy, specifically biblical prophecy. Isaiah 46, 8 through 10. Remember this, keep in mind, take it to your heart, you rebels. Remember the former things, those of long ago. I am God, and there is no other. I am God, and there is none like me. I make known the end from the beginning, from ancient times, what is still to come. I say, my purpose will stand, and I will do all that I please. So in these verses, God is declaring or making prophecy. I make known the end from the beginning, from ancient times, what is still to come. What is still to come is future prophecy, right? This is God's self-fulfilling prophecy because he's saying, I'm going to tell you, and then I'm going to make it happen. The point is, not only is God declaring it, but he's going to do it, right? When we have prophecy that's proven in Scripture, then we are proving that the Scriptures have information from God, right? If it has information from God, then it starts to take a place of authority in our lives. That being said, I'm going to give you the requirements for prophecy in the Bible. 1, prophecy should prove that the message is from God. 2, if it's God's prophecy, it guarantees the rest of God's promises. 3, it prepares us for the future, and this is true about the book of Revelation. 4, it sets the Bible apart from all other religions or religious books. And no other religion or religious books have this kind of prophecy, right? It's amazing. Now, what does prophecy do for us as children of God? 1, it gives us comfort. It gives us the comfort of God's sovereignty. 2, it helps us make sense of what's going on in the world around us. And 3, it gives us understanding about the life and sacrifice of Jesus Christ. So the Bible has many fulfilled prophecies, and more importantly, they are specific and complex prophecies, right? These are the kind of prophecies that we should be interested in because they require historical proof, right? Especially in proving the accuracy of biblical prophecy, right? They're not vague or ambiguous. They're not generalities such as wars and earthquakes. Once you've proven a biblical prophecy, then you can find comfort in knowing that the unfulfilled prophecies will come true. You can take the promises of Revelation and glory in the fact that they will come to pass, right? You have the security of the fulfilled promises when dealing with the insecurity of the unfulfilled promises. So we're going to explore Ezekiel's prophecy about Tyre, specifically Ezekiel 26, 1 through 21. And this is not a prophecy about Jesus. I didn't want to use a prophecy about Jesus, right? I wanted to use a prophecy that has historical accuracy in the secular world. Why? Because it appeals to atheists and other non-believers, right? Using the Bible to discuss prophecies with Christians is great, but the Bible has no authority in the lives of atheists or non-believers, right? The Bible is essentially our book, written by our authors, written by our apostles. And there's many conspiracy theories about the falsehood of the Bible, right? They don't give it any historical credit. So this prophecy takes place hundreds of years before the prophesized event. It's extremely detailed and specific. It prophesizes not only about the destruction of Tyre, but also how it would be destroyed. And many Christians have no idea about it, and that makes it more exciting, right? Its accuracy and descriptive detail make it such an exciting prophecy to listen to. And as I said before, secular history confirms this prophecy as well. And this makes it so much more fascinating because secular history does its best to minimize the impact of Jesus and God in the world. So Tyre was the capital of the Phoenician Empire and a very important city. It was called the Queen of the Seas because many of the sea-bearing trade routes in and out of the Mediterranean Sea were controlled by the Phoenician Empire. It was the most powerful city-state in the empire. It dominated trade throughout the region and the Mediterranean. It had a huge army and a huge navy, and it boasted about it. It was continuously occupied for over 2,000 years and was rumored to be impregnable. There were massive walls around the city that had never been breached. No army had ever successfully broken into the city. So Ezekiel 26, 1 through 21. In the 11th month of the 12th year, on the first day of the month, the word of the Lord came to me. Son of man, because Tyre has said of Jerusalem, the boasting, Aha, the gate to the nations is broken, and its doors have swung open to me. Now that she lies in ruins, I will prosper. So that first part is talking about Babylon's conquering of the world. Babylon easily conquered what was at that time the known world and openly boasted about it. So this is kind of God's rebuttal to that boast, right? Therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I am against you, Tyre, and I will bring many nations against you, like the sea casting up its waves. They will destroy the walls of Tyre and pull down her towers. I will scrape away her rubble and make her a bare rock. Out in the sea she will become a place to spread fish nets, for I have spoken, declares the sovereign Lord. She will become plunder for the nations, and her settlements on the mainland will be ravaged by the sword. Then they will know that I am the Lord. So verses 1 through 6 are a general prophecy about Tyre, right? God is telling us, hey, Tyre has boasted against me and against Israel, saying, we've conquered the known world and nobody's gods came against us, right? Nobody's gods prevented us from conquering the known world, including your God, Israel. So, aha, right? We're boasting. We're telling you you're nothing. So verses 1 through 6 is a general prophecy from God saying, hey, Tyre, I heard your boast, and this is how I'm going to respond to it. The next several verses, verses 7 through 15, are very specific detailed, right? God is now going to respond in specifics, in great detail about what he's going to do to Tyre. For this is what the sovereign Lord says. From the north I am going to bring against Tyre Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, king of kings, with horses and chariots, with horsemen and a great army. He will ravage your settlements on the mainland with the sword. He will set up siege works against you, build a ramp up to your walls, and raise his shields against you. He will direct the blows of his battering rams against your walls and demolish your towers with his weapons. His horses will be so many that they will cover you with dust. Your walls will tremble at the noise of the war horses, wagons, and chariots when he enters your gates, as men enter a city whose walls have been broken through. The hooves of his horses will trample all your streets. He will kill your people with the sword, and your strong pillars will fall to the ground. They will plunder your wealth and loot your merchandise. They will break down your walls and demolish your fine houses, and throw your stones, timber, and rubble into the sea. I will put an end to your noisy songs, and the music of your harps will be heard no more. I will make you a bare rock, and you will become a place to spread fish nets. You will never be rebuilt, for I, the Lord, have spoken, declares the sovereign Lord. So verses 15 through 21. This is what the sovereign Lord says to Tyre. Will not the coastlands tremble at the sound of your fall, when the wounded groan and the slaughter takes place in you? Then all the princes of the coast will step down to their thrones, and lay aside their robes, and take off their embroidered garments. Clothed with terror, they will sit on the ground, trembling every moment, appalled at you. Then they will take up a lament concerning you, and say to you, how you are destroyed, city of the renown, peopled by men of the sea. You were a power on the seas, you and your citizens. You put terror on all who live there. Now the coastlands tremble on the day of your fall. The islands in the sea are terrified at your collapse. This is what the sovereign Lord says. When I make you a desolate city, like cities no longer inhabited, and when I bring the ocean depths over you, and its vast waters cover you, then I will bring you down with those who go down to the pit. to the people of long ago, I will make you dwell in the earth below as in ancient ruins, with those who go down to the pit, and you will not return or take your place in the land of the living. I will bring you to a horrible end, and you will be no more. You will be sought, but you will never again be found, declares the sovereign Lord. So there are several important points in these verses. Through Ezekiel, God gives a very detailed description about the destruction of Tyre, right? I am against you, Tyre, and I will bring many nations against you, like the sea casting up its waves. They will destroy the walls of Tyre and pull down her towers. I will scrape away her rubble and make her a bare rock. So many enemies are going to besiege Tyre one after another, like the waves of the sea, right? Her walls will be destroyed and her towers pulled down. Not even the rubble from the destruction of the city will remain. So then God gives us the name of a specific king who will come up against Tyre, Nebuchadnezzar. He then describes the exact nature of the king's army, right? And it's all about he and him, who is Nebuchadnezzar, right? He is going to destroy Tyre with an immense army. He will do what no other army has done, right? He will breach Tyre and kill many of its citizens. However, in verse 12, the narrative switches from he to them, right? It's no longer about Nebuchadnezzar. At this point, what's left of Tyre is besieged by many other nations, right? They will break down your walls and demolish your fine houses and throw your stones, timber, and rubble into the sea. Right? The city of Tyre is going to be thrown into the ocean, right? The battered and broken pieces of the city will be cast into the sea. And this is incredible detail. Now, here's what the prophecy is promising, right? These are the requirements for the prophecy to be true. Many nations will come against Tyre. 2, they will come like waves of the sea, so in great succession. 3, the villages surrounding the city will be destroyed as well. 4, Nebuchadnezzar will breach the town. 5, he will destroy the walls and towers of the city. 6, the city will be cast into the sea. 7, it will be bare like the top of a rock. And 8, the city will never be rebuilt. And 8's very important. I'm going to get back to 8. So these are very specific details for a very specific prophecy. And this is impressive because the Israelites would not be one of the nations to besiege Tyre, right? At this point in time, they are a very weak nation. The Babylonian Empire was far stronger than the Israelite nation, so they couldn't have participated in this. All the prophecy requirements that I've previously listed happen in a very quick succession, right? Nebuchadnezzar leads a siege against Tyre that lasts 13 years. So if you've seen any movies, right, any movies about ancient times, you know that the main city is surrounded by a wall, right? And then outside of the city are the farmlands. And the farmlands grow the food, right? They grow the natural resources, harvest the natural resources, and then they bring those resources into the city for commerce. So before Nebuchadnezzar could get to the city of Tyre, he had to go through these farmlands, right? He had to make his way through these farmlands. And in so doing, he destroyed the farmlands and killed the farmers, right? And this brings us back to verse 6. And her settlements on the mainland will be ravaged by the sword. So in order for him to get to the city, he had to pass all these small settlements, right? All these small mainland settlements to get to the city. And he had to destroy them to cut off any food resources from being delivered into the city. So he leads a siege against Tyre that lasts 13 years. At this point in time, he can't physically breach the walls, so he builds his own city around Tyre and waits. So you have the initial city of Tyre with its walls. Nebuchadnezzar comes in, right? They can see him. His army is so vast that the guards on the wall of the city of Tyre can see the dust kicked up by their horses. So they see him coming. They know his coming, right? Verse 10, his horses will be so many that they will cover you with dust, right? The walls will tremble at the noise of the war horses, wagons, and chariots. So they see him coming, right? He destroys the farmland. He destroys the outer settlements. And then he builds his own city around the walls of Tyre to cut off resources being delivered to the city or any resources going out from the city. So they don't have resources within the walls of the city. So Nebuchadnezzar just hunkers down and waits, right? He has access to all the resources he wants. But once the farmlands are destroyed, they have no access to all the food. So eventually, Tyre will need food and water, right? Tyre will either stage a final battle, surrender, or die of starvation and dehydration. Nebuchadnezzar has time. He's the king of Babylon. He's not going anywhere. So how did Tyre last so long, right? If Nebuchadnezzar ravaged all the mainland farms, built his own city around Tyre to cut off any resources, how did they last so long? Well, Tyre had a sister island about a half mile off the coast, hidden by the city. And the island, much like Tyre itself, was well fortified. So when Nebuchadnezzar sieged the city by land, they would bring supplies in through the island of Tyre, right? So after many years, the citizens of Tyre realized that Nebuchadnezzar isn't going to give up. So they slowly began moving their belongings to the island of Tyre. And the island was much like the city, except it was protected by one of the greatest naval forces in history. So the citizens retreat to the island, leaving the city completely empty, mostly empty. And Nebuchadnezzar finally breaches the walls, right? His battering rams finally breach the walls, or finally breach the gate, and he gets into the city. Let's see. And he gets into the city, right? He breaks in the city, he parades his army around, and he realizes that it's empty. So in his anger of the city being empty, he starts to destroy it. He starts to break down the walls. He starts to break down the houses, right? He starts to break down everything that he can find, right? Verse 12, they will break down your walls and demolish your fine houses, right? They will plunder your wealth and loot your merchandise, whatever was left, right? So he basically sacks the city. All, if not most of the citizens are gone. He kills whoever is left. And then he returns to Babylon half victorious. And this is the fulfillment of the first half of the prophecy, right? Nebuchadnezzar doesn't fulfill the entire prophecy. He basically fulfills the prophecy up to verse 12. He's not meant to. Almost 200 years later, Alexander the Great will finish the prophecy. So in 332 BC, Alexander the Great shows up on the scene, and he wants to siege the island of Tyre because he wants to conquer the known world, right? So at this point, the city of Tyre is a ghost town because everyone now lives on the island. So Tyre sees Alexander the Great's army coming, right? And even though they're a well-fortified island, they're just an island, right? They're not a huge, imposing city. And the Phoenician Empire is not as strong as it used to be because of Alexander. So Alexander shows up with his army, and Tyre has a crucial choice at this moment, right? They could acquiesce to Alexander and allow him to occupy the city peacefully, or they could fight, right? So Alexander sends an emissary to Tyre and says, hey, submit to my rule, allow me into your city, and allow me into your temple to make a sacrifice to your gods. And this was really actually a very clever move by Alexander, and he did this everywhere he went in order to gain the respect of the people, or to give the people more of a sense of peace about his occupation. Alexander would go into any city that he conquered, and he would pray and make a sacrifice to their God, right? He wouldn't show up and destroy their temples or degrade their God for not saving them, not protecting them. He wouldn't boast. Now, of course, if the city was like, no, we're going to fight you, we don't want you here, go away, yeah, he would destroy the entire city, kill all the people, and of course, degrade the God for not, degrade their God for not saving them or helping them. But when cities were just like, hey, Alexander, yeah, we've seen what you can do, just come in, and do what you need to do. And out of respect or out of a way to keep the people calm or keep peace, he would adopt their God as his own. So it was something that he did, and it was a very clever move by him. Unfortunately, the citizens of Tyre are very picky about their worship, and they're not going to allow a foreigner into their temple. So instead of just sending the emissaries back to Alexander with a simple no, we're not going to let you in, they take them to the top of the walls, slit their throats, and toss their bodies into the water. Now, what happens to Tyre next is important because it solidifies Alexander's reputation as a ruthless conqueror, right? Tyre becomes an example of what happens when you defy Alexander, and from that point on, other cities, they just simply surrender. And we see this in Ezekiel, right? So verses 16, then all the princes of the coast will step down to their thrones and lay aside their robes and take off their embroidered garments. Clothed with terror, they will sit on the ground, trembling every moment, appalled at you, right? And then verse 17 says they will take up a lament concerning you. And that's just, basically them saying, wow, Tyre, you got messed up, right? You thought you were great. You thought you were something. You got messed up. So instead of just Alexander just saying, you're an island, I can't reach you, you're still protected by a great navy, we're going home, he builds a half-mile causeway between the city of Tyre and the island of Tyre using the rubble and remnants of the city. He takes pieces of wood, stone, and rock from the walls and the towers of the collapsed city and throws them into the water. And we see this once again in verse 12. They will break down your walls and demolish your fine houses and throw your stones, timber, and rubble into the sea. So it takes him 11 months to build this bridge to the island, but he does it, right? He doesn't give up. He doesn't go home. He's like, I'm coming over there. I'm coming over there with my troops. I'm going to conquer you. And this is how I'm going to do it. So by 332 BC, the catapult or the ballista had been invented. So Alexander's army carries more pieces of the city across the causeway and catapults them into the walls surrounding the island of Tyre, crumbling them to the ground. So once he gets the catapults across the causeway, it probably takes him mere days to just destroy the city. So he breaches the island city and even destroys the Phoenician navy, right? He completely destroys and decimates everything. And in his anger, because of their defiance, he kills between 7,000 and 8,000 soldiers. And the citizens are also either slaughtered or taken as slaves, right? So the causeway he built has become a peninsula since then. And the coastline of the old city has fallen below sea level, creating a reef. And you can see pictures of it, right? And Alexander's causeway had changed the dynamic and the geography of the land. And this goes back to verse 14. Verse 14 says, the fishermen will cast their nets there, and you will become a place to spread fish nets, right? And that's the only industry that has really thrived there since the desolation by Alexander. And they still fish there today. So this is a detailed prophecy that was fulfilled hundreds of years after it was given. And many, not all, but many Bible skeptics don't believe that this was written after the fact. A lot of people will say, well, the Ezekiel wrote it afterwards and then somehow transposed it into the Old Testament, right? Not really. So the end of verse 12 tells us that the city will never be rebuilt, right? You will never be rebuilt. And rebuilt means to be restored, right? To return to a prior existing state. It doesn't mean to just build something again or to build something new over what remains, right? It's not renovation or remodeling, it's rebuilding. So the modern city of Tyre continues to grow, but it was never restored, right? It was never restored to the state it existed in when it was the queen of the Phoenician Empire, right? It's not a reconstituted city or nation. It's a replacement. It's a substitution. Why? Because the old city is now underwater, right? The old city is now underwater. It still exists, but it's underwater. And this brings us back to verses 21, right? I will make you dwell in the earth below as in ancient ruins with those who go down to the pit, and you will not return or take your place in the land of the living. And we can even go back to verse 19. This is what the sovereign Lord says. When I make you a desolate city, like cities no longer inhabited, and when I bring the ocean depths over you and its vast waters cover you. So Ezekiel's prophecy has fulfilled this fact, right? It's a replacement. It's a substitution. Why? Because the old city is now underwater. It still exists, but it's underwater. So how do you rebuild, restore, or reconstitute something that is underwater? You don't. You have to build over it or above it. And there's actually two distinctions between old Tyre and modern day Tyre. The original city of Tyre was south of the island, right? South of the island of Tyre. And you have to look at pictures of it. Now it's parallel to the island. Historical documents also list two separate geographic locations for Old Tyre and New Tyre, as well as narratives where each city is addressed as either Old Tyre or New Tyre. And the other distinction is that you can't call New Tyre a rebuilt Tyre because none of the pieces from the old city were used in building the new city. The placement of the new city is in a slightly different location due to erosion and the coastline falling below sea level. New Tyre doesn't resemble old Tyre, so it's never been rebuilt. Right now, the coastlines tremble on the day of your fall. The islands in the sea are terrified at your collapse, right? Verse 21, I will bring you to a horrible end and you will be no more. You will be sought, but you will never again be found, right? So it was never again the same city, right? It wasn't the most prominent city in the ancient world ever again. Shortly after its destruction, Alexander would build Alexandria, and that would become the most prominent city in the ancient world, right? It never again held the reputation it had when it was the queen of the Phoenician Empire. Large portions of the island of Tyre, even themselves, are now underwater, right? They sank. You cannot rebuild a city underwater, and it's underwater just as the prophecy foretold. Edward Creasy wrote a book called 15 Decisive Battles of the World. And in chapter 4, he writes this: Alexander the Great did far more against Tyre than Shalmaneser or Nebuchadnezzar had done. Not content with crushing her, he took care that she would never revive. For he founded Alexandria as her substitute and changed forever the track of commerce in the world. So the conclusion is that the Bible is God's word, right? Ezekiel clearly shows that it contains knowledge that couldn't possibly come from the mind of men. And that's the most rational explanation for this prophecy, unless you really want to believe that the book of Ezekiel was written after the death of Alexander the Great and then transplanted into the Old Testament. And if you believe that, there's no evidence for this. So to recap, if you believe the Bible is God's word based off this prophecy, then there is a God. He can't speak prophecy into reality if he doesn't exist, right? There must be a God. It guarantees the rest of his promises. Prophecy says that if this is true, then everything else that God says is true, and that's rational and logical, right? It prepares us for the future. Isaiah 46:11. What I have said that I will bring about, what I have planned that I will do. Revelation 22:6. Then the angel said to me, these words are trustworthy and true. The Lord, the God who inspires the prophets, sent his angel to show his servants the things that must soon take place. So if what God said will happen did happen, then what he says will happen, right? Biblical prophecy is not designed for us to guess at the future details, right? The purpose of knowing the signs of what's to come should not lead to guessing, right? I'm more interested in studying fulfilled prophecy than I am in studying unfulfilled prophecy, because that's not my purpose as a Christian, right? And Jesus speaks out against this very boldly. Matthew 24:36. But about that day or hour no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. And everyone who guesses at the time, the day, or the year just ends up looking ridiculous because they're never right. Live like Jesus is coming back tomorrow, but don't plan on it, right? So many great Bible teachers and great men of God have predicted the day of the second coming and have been wrong, just wrong. And they don't do Christians any favors. They don't do the movement of Christianity any favors when they predict that the end of the world is going to be June 4th, 1986, and then June 5th, 1986 comes along and we're all still here. Be ready, be willing, and don't be troubled, right? Be aware, be vigilant, and be smart, but don't be troubled. There's simply no other religion that contains so much prophecy, right? It gives us great comfort in the sovereignty of God, right? If God is in control of what happened to Tyre, is he not in control of what happens to me? If he can predict what's going to happen hundreds of years before it happens, doesn't that mean he can control what's going to happen? Ephesians 1:11. In him we were also chosen, having been predestined according to the plan of him who works out everything in conformity with the purpose of his will, in order that we, who were the first to put our hope in Christ, might be for the praises of his glory. So he works out everything. He works out everything with the purpose of his will, not the purpose of my will. And I have great comfort in knowing who holds my future, right? We don't have all of our questions answered, or we don't need to have all of our questions answered to have peace. So it helps us make sense of what's going on in the world around us. It gives us understanding about the life and sacrifice of the Lord Jesus Christ. So Revelation 19:10 tells us this: for it is the spirit of prophecy who bears testimony about Jesus. The main character of prophecy throughout the Bible is Jesus. So if you can believe the prophecies of the Bible, you can believe in Jesus. I hope this video has been fruitful for you. Thank you for watching. Have a blessed day.